what's going on, guys? It's me, Train Man, and welcome back to the Zombie Train, episode 200. Oh my god, 200 episodes, holy cow, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Anyways. If you haven't noticed, I didn't do anything special for this episode. I already said I wasn't going to do anything special for this episode. The only thing I would really feel like doing, well, no, I don't feel like doing it, actually, would be change the intro out, and I know the intro is kind of dated at this point, blah, 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 blah. But, frankly, the only thing I'd really do is just shorten it up a little bit, which I could do. It wouldn't be that difficult, but I've already gotten far enough down this path that maybe I'll just take care of that another day. Maybe for 201. Maybe not. Whatever. Anyways, this week we're doing some terrain work, we're doing some blue pushpin work, we're doing some trees and this and that, but nothing really groundbreaking, just filling in some area between here and there. And speaking of not groundbreaking things, the reason I say that, and I don't mean it derisively, because I do like all of the questions. There's actually not been one I don't like yet. It's just sometimes I can go with stuff pretty easily, sometimes I can't. So, this one right here was 282s of the Zombie Train incorporated by Eastrail 11 on episode 186. Now let's go back to episode 186 very briefly. So, Zombie Train 186. I feel like I've gone back to this one quite a bit. Actually, no. Is this the first? Whatever, I can't remember. So, I just finished watching the sermons and I thought, did you use any 282 loco? So, the answer is yes, we did. In fact, we used 9 of them. 282s were not immensely powerful engines overall, and they were not immensely fast engines either. So, they were more useful on sort of drag freights, which were just a little bit too much for a Mikado. Which we did build more Mikados, but typically the 282s were relegated to doing drags and sort of whatever else we had for them. They wouldn't come very high up in the lineup of, okay, you're going to get the tough jobs. Also, it's because we only had 9 of them, and they typically stayed, well, they stayed east of the west. They didn't go out on the plains very much, but they did sometimes, but they would never even touch the Rocky Mountains. More often than not. They would be mostly in the east, mostly operating either in coal country or along the seaboard, pulling those heavier freights. So, we had 9 282s. 2 of these were recovered from Indiana. Or sorry, what is this? This is Iowa. 2 of them were recovered from, well, one of them was from Illinois, one of them was from Kentucky, one of them was from Missouri, I believe that is. One of them was from Oklahoma. One of them was from Texas, another one's from Wisconsin, and the last one was from Wyoming. So, that is our 9 engines. And I can tell you where they came from. So, now, there's a total of, there were in fact 10, which were, or sorry, 9. So, there were no lost engines out of the ones we could get our hands on. Of course, 2 of them were QJs. These were the ones from Iowa, the Iowa Interstate Railroad. And those were running when we got to them, and they ran quite well for a significant period of time. They were not, naturally, they're newer engines. They were built in the 80s. So, yeah. They were easy runners. They were something we could get our hands on really easily. Oh, what is this? Wait a minute. Did I miscount or something? Oh wait, no, I didn't. I just got rid of something else. I forgot how I did this document up. One of them was an F1 class, which was Southern Pacific. That's in the Illinois Railroad Museum. That's on display, which, it took a little bit of work. Obviously, a lot of the ones that are on display, an engine that's on display, if it's indoors, it's easier to take care of than an outdoor one. And if it's on display, it generally means that it's had some cosmetic work done, so it's not in terrible, terrible shape. I don't recall it having any major problems when we took it out, so that was nice. There's another QJ. This one was stored operational. This one's in Kentucky Lexington Center parking lot, actually. Also built 1985. That was the sort of thing, we went in there, we took it out, we put a fire in it, it ran. That was really nice. DM&N Museum of Transportation, St. Louis, Missouri, currently on display, or was on display in 2012, when we got our hands on it. Well, not when we got our hands on it, but when it was there. It was actually over 100 years old when we finally got to it. So that's number 502. Let me get a look at the condition that thing was in when we got our hands on it. DM&N 502. Duluth, Mesab, and Iron Range. Yeah, that's sort of my recollection. Not indoors, but not bad looking overall. It could have used a coat of paint when we got to it, but other than that, after some minor mechanical work and checking to make sure that it could run, it ran. 18SF number 940. This was part of the 900 class on display in Oklahoma. Built at Burnham Shops. This one went on quite an adventure to get to us, and it was towed dead from Bartlesville, where it sits. So let me look at this one. AT and SF 940. And this one I recall, is this oh no, it is, it does have a connection. It's this thing had slippy problems. That's what I recall with this engine just being sort of a letdown in terms of when we actually got it to run. For whatever reason, it didn't want to burn well, it didn't want to steam well, and then ended up just slipping all over the place. It wasn't a particularly fun engine to get behind the throttle of. But, I mean, it did the work that we asked it to. It had a lot of pulling power at low speed, but aside from that, it didn't do very much at all. What's the next one on the list here? Southern Pacific, another F1 type, another good runner. This one was in Texas. A Union Station. SP982. Pictures of SP982. Rare picture archive, useful. Yeah, this one, if I recall correctly, yeah, this is the one I was thinking of. It's just sort of sitting there. The problem with it was a fairly good engine. It did not have a lot of... Hey, Bob Keenan took this picture. I know Bob Keenan in real life. That's awesome. So, anyways, it's just sort of sitting there in the middle of in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of close to some railroad tracks that are built into the street, but other than that, it's just sitting there. It was a chore to get that thing off of where it's hanging out and onto tracks so that we could get it out of there. That thing was also dead towed. Let's see, what else? There are two more. There's another DM&IR engine. So this was 506. This one is a little bit more worse for wear, although it was stored out of the way. This one was missing some pieces, if I recall correctly, mechanically. And we had to find some things for it before we could get operational. And by find, I mean sort of piece together. It was good when we got it to run, but it was a chore to get it running. Now let's see, and the last one is LA and SL Union Pacific. Okay, now this one. This one is part of the Union Pacific collection, which is in Cheyenne. Let me get a picture on it to get a read on how good it was when we got... Oh, it's 5511. this was not something that they were ever planning on running again very clearly. We got up there, we got into that engine house. Obviously there are some solid engines in there. And we got to looking at it, and it's okay, it seems to be alright from an outside perspective. Then you realize it's got no boiler jacket, and it's sort of just been painted up to look nice. Aside from the last one I mentioned, what was that, 506, missing parts, 5511 was probably the most difficult to get running. Now, I noticed a lot of these are Western engines, and I did notice that when we were sort of grabbing them up. But they didn't, out there, not only is there less demand for power, you sort of want something that can get through and out the other side. A lot of these engines, the DM and IR ones, 5511, they don't have very large tenders, and we weren't about to start tender swapping. So, the fact of the matter was, we sort of took them and got them back to the East Coast, which was a chore in and of itself. I've talked about, some of them came... Cheyenne was not a difficult place to get sort of locked down, but it took a while before we really did that, and then we could start working on this engine. It was probably one of the last ones to get out of the shops there. If I recall correctly, it may have been actually the last one to get out there. So they have their Challenger. That was out of service. They have the two... they have the two FEFs, which obviously 844 was operating, and 838 was not. 838 was in some pretty bad shape. That's right. 838 was the last one to get running because we needed to make parts for it. Now that was a bastard. And then 4014, I believe this is too far ahead. 4014 was not in the UP shops, if I recall correctly, at that point in time. So, and then 4004 was nearby. But, yeah, the last engine to come out of Cheyenne was 838. It's shortly after 5511, because it was sort of, before we put our mind to securing the area, it was going there. Sort of doing whatever maintenance we could, clearing out the Zax that came after us, and then, getting out of there before we got completely overrun. It wasn't the kind of place where we wanted to hang out for a length of time, and until we started establishing more transcontinental routes and more transcontinental runs, because we mostly stuck to Marias once we got the bridge patched up, that's when Cheyenne became more useful. And that's when we actually were able to hunker down there and get 5511 and 838 running. And that was a little bit of time, into it. So, obviously, 838, or not obviously, but 838 was much better suited for the environment it was in. So that stayed out there. Being the last engine to run out of there, and being the last engine, being the engine that it took us taking the area for us to get running, that sort of became the engine for that area. And we brought out, hold on. I believe we brought out a smaller area to, there's the UP engine out there, 1242. 460 in Cheyenne, which was very useful to us in the working around of the area, because even 5511 was a little bit too unwieldy, and the 460 did a much better job at what we needed it to do in terms of switching and in terms of just generally sputzing around and not consuming too much fuel. You don't generally use an FEF for that. And it's not like the engines running out of Cheyenne that weren't going extremely long distances had very much to do. It was more of a patrol sort of thing, or last minute, hey, we need some help out here, sort of thing. And 838 was on hand things needed to go far. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week. Train Man out.